thank you everyone who's joined us already for the Food for Thought session with Ben Atkinson, who's a Senior Account Director at LinkedIn for Global Accounts. Yeah, so he will tell us a little bit about networking, clearly in the times of COVID-19, under lockdown, under social distancing. What can we think about when it comes to networking, clearly professional networking? Yeah. A quick reminder in terms of housekeeping rules and logistics. So you can ask questions throughout the session. You can do so by clicking in on the Q&A tab and posting your questions over there. I will curate your questions and I will ask Ben these questions together towards the end. Yeah? You can always send a message separately as well, and I can pick up your questions from there. But I would recommend do post your questions on the Q&A tab. A quick reminder again, as you know, this is a weekly webinar series, Food for Thought, and we have some upcoming webinars. So next week, we will be talking about monitoring misconduct, yeah? Maintaining and developing banking standards. Is it the right time? Is it over? Is the debate over? So we'll talk a little bit about that. We will talk about the nature of ambition, human ambition, and how that matters on 30th September. And on 7th of October, we will be talking to the CEO of a blockchain company on how to scale up a sustainable technology business during these times. Yeah. So that's a little bit about what's coming up. And without further ado, let me hand over the sharing privileges to our guest today, Ben, who will tell us a little bit about LinkedIn and, of course, networking in times of COVID-19.
Great. Thanks, Aneesh, and thanks so much for inviting me. It's nice to be able to again talk to you. You're one of the professors that I studied under doing an MBA, and you were really inspiring. So really nice to be invited to do this. So I'm going to share a few slides, talk about networking, and probably just sort of talk about a little bit of a process that I think is really important within networking. And yeah, if there's any questions, I have to sort of field them as they come in and as we go. So I'll just share my screen. Okay, great. So I was going to kick off just firstly with looking at LinkedIn and what the impact of COVID has been and what we've seen on site, and where we've sort of monitored different behaviours on site. And just to give you a background, we're over 700 million members now, so we have this rich pool of data of not just your past experience, your companies you work out, your education. We also have a lot of data around actual activity, so actual behavior when you're on the site and how you're working. And as we go along, we have lots of different trends which we run surveys about, and just to sort of monitor, and throughout this crisis has been a real time where we've really upped our amount of outreach and surveys we've done. So just to look at some of the things around the sort of work everywhere and how it's sort of changed. So we've done surveys during the sort of really sort of deep part of the crisis and looking at how people are working. So with the respondents we've had, 43% of the respondents are now working remotely. 36% of respondents said they feel that they're more productive when working from home. Senior leaders, over 50%, have reported that companies are implementing lots of virtual events, lots of commentary on what's going on. So the amount of outreach and content has increased massively. And everybody is doing a lot more calls, a lot more video time, a lot more sort of FaceTime, and 45% think that this is going to be more of a permanent shift in how we're working. So I'm sure that you've all got opinions about how that sort of looks and how your work has changed, and probably the longevity of it. But I think that this is really sort of gives you that sort of initial sort of moment to think the world of work is changing and the way people are networking is changing. So it's really important to approach it in a way that's probably a little bit of thought behind it. So I tried to break this down into like the 4 Ps of networking, because I think it's really easy to jump into networking and almost do the scattergun approach, where you're trying to get numbers. You're looking for people to link in with you, for people to connect to what you're doing, people to follow you, and people to join in with some of the content that you're writing. But I think for networking, you've got to have a little bit of a shift from not, this isn't just like a social media where you're trying to build a mass following. This is networking where you're trying to create a quality, valuable network of people that can serve a purpose. So that's the first P of networking is purpose, finding the why, the purpose you are actually doing this networking, which is hugely important. And having a plan, because without a plan, you can't move towards that purpose. And prioritization is hugely important. We'll sort of show you a little bit of reason why in a minute. And then the personalized part. I think that this is a part which is easily forgotten. We're not dealing with numbers. We're not dealing with stepping stones in your career. We're dealing with people. So unless you actually humanize your approach and personalize your approach, you're going to damage either your personal brand, your ability to network, and your sort of equity that you build up within your network. So it's massively important. Okay, so what we're going to do before we jump into that, I'm just going to give you a little bit of an idea of why networking is so powerful. And it's actually the whole sort of premise of networking is the whole reason that LinkedIn got invented, basically. So Reid Hoffman and the other founders of LinkedIn were sitting talking about their networks, really well-connected people. They know everybody in startups, everybody in tech in Silicon Valley. And they realized that if they knew who the people in that room knew, that they could almost achieve anything, because they could be introduced to anyone. And just to sort of illustrate that, if you look at just myself, if I've got, let's say, 20 people that I could make an introduction to for Aneesh to, and then if we look at those 20 people that I could introduce you to, Aneesh, and each one of those people had another 20 unique people to introduce you to, that's already out to 400. Those 400 have 20 people, 8,000. Those 8,000 have 20 people, and so on and so forth. Just within 6 introductions, you've got 64 million people that you could be introduced to through basically 6 degrees. And the important thing about that is the different paths that you might go on can mean that you get introduced to anybody you want to be introduced to, let's say Robert De Niro. And another path may mean you could get introduced to Jacinda Ardern, the PM in New Zealand. So this power of the network is this theory of 6 degrees of separation, and LinkedIn was built around that. There was actually a website before LinkedIn called 6 Degrees of Separation, and like a lot of these very successful platforms, there was a forerunner which didn't quite get the go-to-market fit, and LinkedIn sort of overtook them. But this is the whole theory that it's built off. So the thing that you need to realize here is you have the vast ability to be introduced to just about anybody that you want to get to, but you've got a huge limit on the amount of time you have and the amount of connections which you can sort of burn within that. So the first thing that you really need to think about is purpose. So before you do anything, you think about, why am I doing this? Why am I networking? So, and I sort of feel that this sort of falls into three buckets, and it's quite a healthy way of thinking about networking. So there's obvious ones where you're networking for your career, and I think that's something that people automatically go to when they're sort of thinking, right, career, I'm networking for my career. But there's loads of other stuff. So there's things like sort of self-development. I think that sort of that learning, that creating things which aren't just about your career, but just you growing as a person. And then the third one, social. So there's so much about your network which is so important with that sort of social factor. So friends, family, etc. And all these overlap slightly. So So there's going to be, if you're really starting your career and starting your journey into creating a network, that whole social part, maybe that's your biggest network right now. That's your friends, that's your family, and they're people who are really close to you. And that's your ability to be able to connect with them and understand where they can make introductions into career, into self-development. In whole of the sort of career side, it may be that you're a bit head down thinking just about progression, career progression. Let's think about how we network for that. But it may fall into different buckets. Let's say if you are then in a career which is in sales, and networking is a massively important part of that, and how you use your network to reach the right people, to get those proper introductions is hugely important. And the power of an introduction is massive. So we talk about at LinkedIn about social selling. So it's something which we sort of built out as a narrative for our sales tools that you can get through LinkedIn, and it's about creating that that awareness of yourself, that your personal brand, and understanding the person you're trying to reach out to well enough that you can create a connection before you've made that call. So you don't have to make any cold calls anymore. It's about using LinkedIn and other avenues to really sort of start to build and make a connection. And so within all of these sort of areas, it's good to start to think about what's the plan and and how do you prioritize that. So have a think about where you're going in all these areas. And I think it's quite healthy to split these out and have a different sort of maybe purpose or path within each one. And think about that sort of whole network as something you should prioritize as well. So the people you spend your time with, both in your sort of career and socially and in the self-development, is going to really sort of change actually how you develop and what you sort of are able to achieve. And actually sit down and write a plan of like, let's say in your career, what are the 100 companies which you would really aspire to work for, and then really prioritize that. What's your top 10? And who do you need to sort of talk to or reach to get to that plan? And it may be that you're thinking this is a 5-year plan of just better understanding those companies to understand where you need to go and what you need to go for. And then finally, just that personalized piece. And I think that that this is really sort of bearing out on LinkedIn. That we're really sort of seeing not only sort of the way that people are working that is changing, the way people are using LinkedIn is really sort of changing as well. So there's been a massive boost in traffic and engagement. So we're seeing like professionals spending far more time using social media during this time, and I think that's going to continue. We're seeing a massive increase in the actual conversations and interaction, and then also we're seeing loads of content being created. The 60% increase year over year of content creation. So people have got that impetus to reach out and create content and create their own personal brand. But all this is sort of saying to me that there's an awful lot of noise. There's an awful lot of messaging. There's an awful lot of content. There's an awful lot of conversations, and you're probably feeling it personally. I've got so many WhatsApp groups I'm on. I've got instant messenger. I've got messages through LinkedIn. I've got Teams. I've got Blue Jeans, Zoom, all these different sort of avenues where I'm being constantly sort of hit up. So my biggest sort of tip is to really personalize your approach, and you may be trying to get maybe to a specific person or a specific company, but those in between conversations, those in between people are really important, and don't misuse those introductions. So humanize it, personalize it, and treat people with that sort of respect. So I think that the research sort of shows that naturally we have a predisposition of having a network of about 150 people. There's a number of different studies that have said that's sort of like the point where relationships sort of fall off the edge and people sort of lose that that sort of closeness. And that sort of is quite a good sort of thing to aim for, that sort of 150 of people who are actually going to be really important to your career, your development, and your sort of social life as well. Okay, so those are my four recommendations. Hopefully that's a good sort of start. Over to you, Aneesh.
That's absolutely fantastic, Ben. And that's exactly what I think a lot of people do have on their mind. And I clearly would like to start off with some questions. First of all, thank you so much for a lot of thought-provoking ideas. I really like the 4Ps, gives a very nice structure for people in a business school, essentially, to start thinking about professional networking, sets the foundation. Yeah. I have quite a few questions, but let me focus on two to begin with. First and foremost, this whole idea of the personal brand and the image, to a large extent, it is clearly driven by what we post on these kind of professional networking sites. Essentially, for example, our achievements, or if we go on do an elective or something on those lines, right?
Yeah.
I want to start off by asking you, what are the etiquettes, if any, around what are the emerging etiquettes around professional networking? So if I'm a student, for instance, what should I be definitely posting? What should I be thinking twice before I post on, say, LinkedIn?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I think that this sort of goes back to that sort of 4Ps where it's all about looking at that purpose, looking at that, why am I posting? Well, and I get, so I work a lot with a lot of marketing professionals and how they represent brands and how they represent their messages on LinkedIn. And time again, I'll sit down with them and they say, right, we've got this great idea for a post. We've got this great idea with a piece of content. And we're going to sort of do this sort of story. And time again, I'll ask them why. And they haven't really deeply thought about it. So they'll say, well, we want to build our brand presence. And then, well, why? And we want to build our brand presence to increase our followers. Okay, that's great, but why do you need more followers? We need that to create more interest in our this product. And so you go down this sort of like path, and they're going, okay, until you get to the point where they are trying to achieve a specific goal. So I think that it's good to do that little soul searching of like, because you can post and stuff, and it can be a little bit of a waste of your time. But what I'd say is there's a lot of stuff where it's actually finding something you're really interested in, something that you're passionate about, something that's relevant to your, maybe let's talk about your career, but it's a sort of area that you really care about. Because then it'll make it easier, and then it'll make it, you'll learn, and you'll also be able to start posting stuff and start to find people who will interact with it, who will comment, like, share, and that might be your next sort of connection within your network, which is you'll see them and you'll say, oh, that'd be a really interesting person to talk to, and they got the same interests. So yeah, I think that's probably the best way to do it, and it'll be more relevant.
Yeah, I see what you mean, which is essentially to understand the why question as to why should I be posting something that I have done, for instance. So Paulina is asking a question online, and she's essentially says that, and she kind of shares our observation a little bit, but she gives it a clear definition. She essentially says LinkedIn is becoming a little bit like Facebook, with content increasingly being less professional and more informal. And I've noticed that when people have essentially, what we might get on a WhatsApp forward, for instance, quite often is posted on LinkedIn. And she is asking, how can LinkedIn effectively be misused if somebody wanted to? Is there a potential for it to be misused?
Yes, there is. There is definitely a potential to be misused. And I think that the probably misuse there is for example, if you go on there and you are trying to connect with everybody, you're like trying to connect with all people, and then badgering them or just creating that sort of like poor experience for other people. I think that's probably one of the biggest misuses.
Right.
It's I think it's less common, but it's something that we do see sometimes. People creating fake accounts and stuff like that happens. But yeah, I think sort of that sort of misuse, and probably to a point about the sort of almost shift in things that are being posted. I think that some of that has grown out of just the fact that we've grown our demographic a huge amount. So there's a huge difference in the sort of demographic that's on there, and the reasons why people are on there. And that sort of comes back to the sort of thing where I'm sort of saying, look at your network and probably try and limit it in a way where you've got a valuable network on LinkedIn. So sometimes go through your connections and go, actually, am I really adding value to that person? Am I really getting value from that person? Maybe not. So maybe drop them as a connection. And this will actually sort of change your experience on LinkedIn, because you're linked to people who are interested in the same things, posting about the same things. Maybe they are also in the same sort of mindset as you, as what you want to see on LinkedIn. Then your news feed will change, because you will be delivered stuff from those people. You're following the companies that you're interested in, the organizations that you care about, the news feeds and the hashtags that you're interested in. Your news feed will actually change to reflect that. And also it'll learn, because obviously it's got AI, machine learning, and the stuff you interact with, you'll see more of. So stop interacting with the stuff that's too Facebooky.
Absolutely. And in fact, I completely agree with you. I actually know of people who have stopped following people, or even have dropped that connection exactly to what you're saying, because they're essentially publishing or posting rubbish. And to the personal brand argument, that's clearly detrimental to your personal brand if you start publishing which are things that are not relevant. So I suppose there'll be some kind of a corrective mechanism that will come into the market anyway.
Yeah, I think so.
Let me go to the next question that's come online from Glenda, and she's saying there seems to be more, even more people who are asking to connect with the sales messages included in the invitation. Like all networking, shouldn't it be about growing relationships first? So when is it okay to pitch something as a sales on a professional networking site like this?
Yeah. It's a tough one to call that.
I mean, surely there is no perfect timing, but
there's that. Well, I suppose the perfect time is when they approach you for a price. But I think, yeah, and I think this is sort of comes down to sort of being sort of careful with your personal brand again, but also. It sort of there's lots of triggers and lots of sort of almost indications that someone might be more interested than someone else, which can come down to like the type of things they're interested in, the type of things they're interacting with. But I think that there's sort of an element of gauging the type of product you might be selling, or service you might be selling, being really targeted about who you're reaching out to. So I think that there's a lot of people that still do that scattergun approach, which does two things. It's not great for your brand, but it also creates a load of work for you. So if you think about, if I reach out to 1,000 people and only 10% of those people are actually relevant to me, but 400 of them come back, I've got 300 more people who aren't relevant to me, who might be asking ridiculous questions, who've just wasted a load of my time. So if I do the upfront bit, my research, my due diligence, I can actually cut that down to maybe reaching out to 200 people, 300 people, and get a much better return and save a load of time. So I think it's probably just doing your due diligence and also being respectful in the way you sort of reach out there. If people aren't interested, then fine, it's gone. But also I think you almost waste an opportunity to make a relationship sometimes if you're just straight in with the pitch, straight into that. It may be they're not the right person, and they're not the right person to speak to within that business. But if you haven't made the time to do something a little bit more personalized, they're not going to introduce you to the right person. They're not going to introduce you to their colleague in another business who would actually be really interested in what you're talking about. Yeah,
very nice. Yeah,
yeah, a little bit of time can be really, really valuable.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, very nice. There's a very interesting question from an undergraduate student who perhaps is starting out on their professional journey. So Raghav is asking, I'm an undergraduate student, I'm just starting out on my professional journey. Who should I be thinking about building my network with? Who should I be connecting with if I'm an undergraduate student?
Yeah, I think that's it's something that you start your career, you sort of think, who do I need to be tapping up, and you can't automatically jump to the CEO of Microsoft or whoever you really want to sort of start to interact with. So I think it's like a journey in a lot of respects. Right now, as an undergrad, there's loads of priorities in your life which you've got to achieve. So there's a few things which you've got to do over the next 2, 3, 4 years, which are really important. And there's lots of people who are close to you within your network who can help you do that. So it may be the people who are your professors or colleagues that you're studying with. There's loads of people that you actually think, right, they're really interesting people. Let's connect with them and let's start to build that network there. And also, if you've got a purpose and you've got sort of direction in where you're going, you can actually reach out to these people within your closer network to say, do you know what, I'm really interested in, let's say, cloud computing. And do you know anyone that could sort of help me on that journey? Do you know anyone I could talk to? So then your network starts to naturally build, and they can make those valuable introductions. And I think that there's a real sort of important sort of theory around sort of problem solving, where if you talk to most people, they're really willing to help other people. These sort of 90 whatever % of people are really quite willing to help other people.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you ask the same question, like if you ask the question, do you ask for help? Do you ask for guidance? I think the amount of those people is really small. So the bottleneck here is actually asking that question, asking that, do you know anybody who'd be helpful for me here? Do you have any advice for me about this and who I should be talking to? So I think that sort of reaching out to the people close to you, having a purpose, can just sort of start that little journey, which you might not know where that's going to go, and you might not know who's going to be the next part of that journey, but it can be hugely valuable.
Very nice, Ben. So the questions are flowing in right now. People have clearly woken up on pretty much at the last minute. So let me do a 2-minute quick fire round of questions, right? So you have literally 10 seconds to respond.
10 seconds. Okay.
Okay. So first question is from an etiquette point of view, from the point of view who's receiving an invitation to connect. Should we connect with people only that we know, or what's the etiquette of that? Only people who we know, trust, met, or should we accept random people?
Yeah. So I think it's a judgment both on, is that person going to bring you value, but also are you going to bring them value? And is it a good addition to your 150 or whatever number you're looking at?
Right. Okay. There are lots of questions basically around that. So another suggestion perhaps is perhaps there's a space for LinkedIn to educate people not to cold call or how to reach out to people who are unknown, etc. Yeah. But clearly,
sure.
I mean, you cannot completely restrict that. People will be people at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And last but not least, there is a question again on the etiquettes, which is it acceptable to post images on LinkedIn regarding not only your career interests, but personal ones, for example, hobbies, etc. You've already touched upon this clearly. Depends a little bit on the self-image
sure.
you're trying to. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and I think again is humanize it. People talk to people. People are interested in what you're interested in and passionate about. So definitely, I think there's lots of avenues where you'll actually make connections because you love wakeboarding or you love I don't know, chess. I don't know, but there will be connections made from that as long as it's sort of like some sort of relevance within there.
Very nice. Thank you so much, Ben. That was absolutely fantastic.
Absolute pleasure.
Really food for thought, what we wanted to achieve, which is how do we improve our professional networking, especially in times of COVID, clearly through LinkedIn, and lots of very nice ideas. I can quickly remind people about the 4 Ps that you started out with. Perhaps purpose is the most important thing. And I can tell you personally, I think that itself adds a lot of insight into the way I'll use LinkedIn already. Yeah. Thank you so much once again. Thank you so much for taking time.
No worries. And if anybody wants to reach out and connect or ask a question, feel free. My name's Benjamin Atkinson on
LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that Ben is, of course, a friend of the business school. Clearly, he's studied away, like you mentioned, and I'm sure he'll be very happy to answer your questions even outside of this webinar. So feel free to connect with Ben already. Yeah. I want to remind everyone that there are 3 more webinars already in the pipeline. So please pen it in your calendars or pencil it in your calendars and do register so that you can join these webinars. So once again, thank you so much, Ben, and see you everyone.
Pleasure. Take care.
Bye.